Hello there, welcome to Let's Talk Criterion. In this edition, we'll be looking at the Masterpieces Blu-ray set from the Belgian director Chantal Akerman, ranging from 1968 to 1978. In this set, we have our short films, documentary features, and full-length features, including, of course, the film that was voted first place in the Sight and Sound magazine Top 100 Greatest Films of All Time list, and that is Jean Dman, 23, Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. Now, we'll touch upon whether the film itself serves that accolade when we reach it, as it focuses on the set itself as a whole. Now, the set consists of 9 titles, and they are 3 full-length feature films, 4 short films, and 2 documentaries. Chantal Akerman was born in June 1950 in Brussels to Jewish parents. She was the older sister of Sylviane Akerman, her only sibling, and her mother, Natalia, nicknamed Nellie, survived for years at Auschwitz, where her own parents were murdered. From a young age, Akerman and her mother were exceptionally close, and her mother encouraged her to pursue a career rather than to marry young. She was inspired to become a filmmaker after she watched Jean-Luc Godard's film Pierrot le Fou in 1965. Now, she was only 15 at the time. At the age of 18, Akerman entered the Institut National Supérieur des Arts du Spectacle et des Techniques de Diffusion, and that is a Belgian film school. She dropped out during her first term to make the short film Saute Mavil, funding it by trading diamond shares on the Antwerp Stock Exchange. Now let's begin with that film, Saute Mavil. Translated into English, it's Blow Up My Town. She made this 13-minute black and white short when she was only 18 years of age. A pungent and tragic comic critique of domestic life and the literal explosion of the so-called feminine universe. The first short film by Chantal Akerman. It allows each of us to identify with the position of women assigned to the home. Here, the kitchen, that's the emblematic space of this universe, is a retort, glorifying the revolt against this confinement, doomed to its own destruction. It's a very mature start to her career, actually. Saute Mavil is supported by images constructed like a burlesque, and the performance of an actress that seems to come straight out of slapstick comedy. And this exuberant character is in fact played by the filmmaker herself, who literally bursts in front of a large building with the sounds of the city being omnipresent, flowers in hand to get back to her apartment. Akerman's humming adds an enthusiastic and light touch to this jaunty entrance. Now, gradually in the narrow space of the kitchen, Akerman seals up a window. Now, this action is shown as one of the rituals of daily life: collecting one's meal, buying flowers, tidying cupboards, cleaning, polishing shoes. This obsession with the daily rituals of the housewife, she, of course, would carry forward into her 1970s full-length feature, Jean Dman. L'enfant aimé, ou le jeu à être une femme mariée, the beloved child, or the loved child, or I play as a married woman, is a Belgian medium film directed by Chantal Akerman in 1971, and it remained unfinished. It was considered a failed and lost film by herself, but the film was screened at a retrospective in London in 2013. It is a running time of 32 minutes, and it features a young mother played by Claire Rotillon, whose day-to-day routines are intercut with her stream of consciousness, ruminations on her family, sex life, relationships and body. Now, Akerman was never satisfied with how this film turned out, and she had regular disagreements on the set with her cameraman at the time. Again, she appears in the film as the young mother's confidant. Daphne Mercer also appears in the film as a little girl. L'Enfant Aimé is shot in black and white once again, with location sound recording of very variable quality and audibility. The sense that time is passing, sometimes slowly, sometimes as if there is not enough of it. The pacing changes in the film sharply several times over, and it's inescapable throughout the film. And if toys must be tidied away, we actually see all of that task being performed. If a window must be shut, we see all of the journey to that room and then the window being shut. And if dinner must be cooked, we're not spared the washing up either. Akerman's patient observation of detail and of the flurries of activity without obvious cause, the sound levels in compressed 16mm optical sound are generally unmerciful and without subtlety. Sounds are placed, not adjusted. The pattern of the edit in the film is mirrored by the patterning of the sound world. This is a constructed edifice, and again, it's a very accomplished short film work for only her second short. Now, with La Chambre in 1972, Akerman's dialogue with the 1960s avant-garde movement of structural cinema begins, with the first film she made in New York City. A breakthrough in her experiments with the bending of cinematic time and space. Now, this time, as the camera completes a series of circular pans around a very small apartment, the interior's furniture, its clutter, and the filmmaker herself, staring back at us from bed, they become the subjects of a moving still life. Now, this film only runs for 11 minutes, and she also begins to use the medium of colour in her films. Chantal Akerman's La Chambre is silent, and its silence cannot be understated. Silence is an integral part of this film, because not only is La Chambre silent, it is visually stunning. The silence is not meant to quiet our eyes or our thoughts, but to illuminate our visual field. And indeed, from the very first frame, the bright red velvet chair, to the alluring shots of Akerman in her bed, the imagery gains depth as it requires patience. Now, there is an old world feeling to this room. Elements like metal, wood, fruit, and cloth lie unencumbered by bright plastic cheap objects of contemporary culture. And how the camera dictates what we see here draws the viewer in, and it's almost like a time capsule. And of course, she remains in New York for her next feature, entitled Hotel Monteray. Now, this is a documentary feature, although you could say La Chambre had a documentary feel to it also. New York City's Hotel Monteray was apparently built around 1909, and by the time of Chantal Akerman's 1972 silent experimental film that features the building as the movie's sole character. Now, the motel had been turned into lower-rent apartments into the midst of what was a somewhat run-down neighbourhood. Akerman and cinematographer she had at the time, Dman, set about gradually ascending the floors of a Fleabag motel in Manhattan over the course of a single day, pausing throughout to scrutinise the building's nether regions in intense, uninterrupted takes. Hotel Monteray, in its way, is a Warholian screen test for a building, and it seems likely that the film's overall aesthetic informed later films such as Kubrick's The Shining. Now, as it rises towards an eventual release from the interior space, Akerman breaks the stasis for a ghostly slow-motion slide down a top-floor hallway towards a window and back. This is a dolly move that is then reprised multiple times in a row under various lighting conditions. Hotel Monteray, as I say, is 62 minutes, so it invites you to stay around as the camera traverses the building, unveiling its sights. It was filmed over the course of 15 hours in a day, and this radical silent experiment in duration stands as one of Akerman's most arresting formal achievements. Now, her sensibilities switched to something more European in tone here. It's a documentary feature, and it focuses on just one subject. August the 15th, 1973, in a Paris apartment, Finnish expatriate Chris Mielikowski opens up to the camera about her anxieties and her uncertainties, her aspirations and her ennui, and the sense of vulnerability that she feels being a woman alone in an unfamiliar country. And as her voiceover narration shifts between the mundane and the searching, Akerman's observant camera remains attuned to tiny gestures that tell a story of their own. Je tue, il, elle. This is divided into 3 sections and is united by a young woman's quest for sexual knowledge. This woman is first presented in solitude. though linked to someone else through the writing of a long letter. Her increasing discomfort here is externalized by stripping her room and herself bare, as if disposing of all that is inessential. We hear Akerman's voiceover narration in this section only, describing some of her actions, though what she does say doesn't always match what we see her do. Now, the second part of the film shows her hitchhiking, and here we witness her intense curiosity for the trucker who picks her up, her compliance with his understated request, and her absorbed listening to the story he tells her about the changes he has experienced in his sexual desire for both his wife and his daughter. In the final section, she arrives at the apartment of a young woman who at first refuses her and then feeds her and then makes love with her. Both of them are naked and presented frontally to the camera in a long take, after which Akerman exits the frame and is heard singing in the shower. Je, tu, il, elle. The title itself is all in first-person pronouns, making it quite personal, and her use of Delphine Seyrig is to continue with her next and longest feature, Jean Dman. It clocks in at 201 minutes, which, of course, as I mentioned earlier, took first place in the Sight and Sound film poll, voted indeed in that spot by critics. Many will, of course, debate how it rose to such lofty heights, but let me just talk to you about that now. I think the clue is in Akerman's style of filmmaking itself. This 1975 feature, which presents itself at its most developed, it returns to that theme of observing the mundane, in which sometimes more sinister happenings lie in wait. And we really do just that. We watch the central protagonist prepare meals, cook meals, clean, go out and literally get the shopping. And her somewhat unforgiving son appears in the film, only to be present, really. There is no great intimacy demonstrated here. Akerman chooses to lock her camera in more distant static shots, observing, but never really getting close to the woman herself, and thereby we just don't share how she's feeling emotionally with these gentlemen callers, who we quickly surmise the purpose for which they visit. And again, a total lack of intimacy is seen here as well. But she's clearly making enough money with these pursuits to survive and, of course, to serve her son's needs. And then we see things begin to slowly unravel. It's only with the detail that Akerman has presented her routine hitherto that we can see it now begin to come apart as she gets more inattentive, and we know something is wrong, but we're still unsure what it is. It's only when we have her final violent outburst that we realise what her real emotional state is. It's one of anger at the man who disrupts her otherwise ordered routine, and one on which she needs to take a revenge. Now, this film is life in minutiae. Perhaps if her son is more intuitive, he might have realised how she felt, but of course he's not there for that purpose at all. He's only there to add to the melange that builds to the film's eventual climax. Now, I have to say, I am totally in admiration of the sheer patience and fastidiousness with which Akerman deals up this narrative. Sounds play a large part, as well as how the images are presented in a filmic way, and as well, of course, as the absence of a lot of dialogue, especially with the male visitors and her son, and us not seeing the act occur, and with regard to her relationship with her son. Now, Akerman called Jean Dman a feminist film, but not a militant one. She said that Jean is neither a role model nor an example of a victim. Her violent outburst at the climax of the film is done to regain this disrupted order of her life. Made by a crew composed almost exclusively of women and a 24-year-old female director working outside dominant systems and the norms of length, plot, visualization and dress, Jean Dman was seen as a model for a cinema of the future, in which filmmakers would embrace woman-centered means of expression, as well as content. Now, one of the aspects of Akerman's visual style that was most noted was the separation that she maintained between the visual field occupied by the camera, which she has often equated with her own view, and the field observed by the camera. Now, Akerman's second major trip to New York in May of 1976 led to News from Home, based on the letters her mother had written to her during her first trip there. A 16mm non-synced sound production, the film was shot again by Mangold and is much more directly related to the American experimental tradition. Here, the soundtrack in which a young woman reads letters against the background of ambient sounds of New York City endows the images with a significance that would otherwise be entirely absent. There is an absolute non-coincidence between seeing and hearing. The images look almost like photographs. Streets, arid subways with people randomly present, or indeed absent. None of them the daughter, addressed in the letters, who is never actually seen. Akerman's domestic films from this period explored the crushingly numbed rhythms of interior life, and her New York movies, in general, expanded this scope to shared spaces and public existence. News from Home, with long takes, focused on the bustle of public commutes, of people walking en masse, but exchanging neither words nor glances. She also composes Hopper-esque images of late-night drifters, of graveyard shift workers, and night owls slumped over in insomniac fatigue. The locations chosen for News from Home, they correspond to the areas where Akerman used to take walks when she lived in New York, and that included the Times Square subway station and a long shot driving up 10th Avenue from 30th to 49th Street in Hell's Kitchen. Other streets and other scenes were filmed in Tribeca and on the Staten Island Ferry. And the sound wasn't recorded along with the images. It was added later. This film has a running time of 89 minutes. Following News from Home, Akerman returned back to Europe and launched her first large-scale production, that's Les Rendezvous d'Anna. Aimed at a much broader audience, the film follows a young woman as she travels with her new film from Germany to Belgium to France. According to Akerman, it's at once about Europe and about Anna, that's a filmmaker, returning to her mother as the centre of her life and the structural centre of the film. Akerman has talked of Anna's travels in terms of the wandering Jew and of her own sense of uprootedness. In Les Rendezvous d'Anna, as in many of Akerman's previous films, autobiography is presented as if there's an invisible wedge which had been driven between the lived experience and the audience experience, and we look on to a stylised world that would not be called autobiographical in the usual sense. Keeping a distance, as always, a key element in Akerman's cinema, both the focus of her film's power and a barrier to its popularity. And aside from numerous television documentaries, her attempts to adjust her filmmaking to commercial norms have not been really successful. On the other hand, she's maintained a loyal following worldwide, and people who appreciate the challenges her films initiate, one after the other, so memorably in the 1970s. Now, the films in the set and their running times and aspect ratios are now on the screen. Akerman's final work, No Home Movie, that's 2015, consisted of conversations with her mother, recorded shortly before the latter's death in 2014. And of course, I do need to mention that Akerman herself had long struggled with depression, and in fact, she sadly committed suicide in 2015. Now, the features on this extensive set are as follows. New 4K digital restoration of Les Rendezvous d'Anna and 2K digital restorations of La Saute Mavil, L'Enfant Aimé ou Le Jouet à Entre une Femme Mariée, La Chambre, Hôtel Monteray, Le 15-8, Je te Hillel, Jean Dillman 23, Quai de Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, and News from Home, with uncompressed mono soundtracks. Hanging Out Yonkers, that's an unfinished film from 1973 from Chantal Akerman. Film school tests from Akerman. New programme on Akerman featuring critic B. Ruby Rich. New visual essay on Akerman featuring archival interviews. Auteur de Jean Dillman, that's a documentary made during the filming of Jean Dillman. Shot, of course, by the actor Sami Frey and edited by Agnes Ravez, and Akerman interviews with Akerman, cinematographer Babette Mangolt, actors Aurore Kelmont and Selphine Seric, and Akerman's mother, Natalia, an appreciation by filmmaker Iris Sachs. and there's an essay and notes on the films by the critic Beatrice Loiza. These features certainly give more insight into this fascinating filmmaker. Criterion are certainly honouring her most prolific work with Chantal Akerman masterpieces 1968 to 1978. It releases on Blu-ray in the US only on Tuesday the 23rd of January, collectively as Spine 1203. I'd just like to welcome the latest subscribers to the channel and to give you this wonderful news. We have recently passed 500 subscribers, for which I'm really thankful, and I'm quite astonished. I started this channel 4 years ago during the COVID lockdown, where I was mainly focusing on the BFI Blu-ray releases here in the UK. We have Mudbound, directed by Dee Rees. She has already got another title in the collection, of course, Pariah. This comes to the collection on Blu-ray. So until then, from me, it's goodbye, and above all, good Criterion viewing.